Hi there, Louis from Spitfire Audio here. In this video, I'm going to be showcasing one of my Albion NEO demos that I've written, but this time using Ableton Live. So this piece that I've written, it uses a lot of the NEO loops and a little bit of brass, and you've also got some strings and some Segler textures in there. So let's take a listen. So as you can hear, I'm using a lot of the loops and some of the electronic sounds that are available in the Albion NEO library, as well as some little brass shorts and some strings as well. But it's the loops that I used mainly as the foundation when starting to write this piece. So if I open up the UI, I'm using a patch called Driving Up, and I've just got it on the percussion articulation. And the way the loops work is when you select what instrument in the loop you want to focus on, it's divvied up in octaves, and each octave plays the same thing, and then the next octave it might sort of increase a bit or change slightly, and it will keep changing depending on the octave that you're playing it at. So for this piece, I started right at the bottom end of the keyboard, and it was playing a sort of fairly less busy percussion sort of rhythm, and then as the piece went on, I gradually just shifted and played an octave higher and an octave higher, showing off kind of all the loops in this percussion section of this patch. So I'll go ahead and play some of those loops now, so you can hear the difference without all of those other instruments. So the initial sound being this. And then around the 40-second mark is where kind of more instruments are introduced, and our percussion loop kind of changes quite drastically. So it goes from this into this. And then it just keeps building up. And that's the most sort of extreme percussion sound within that patch. So looking at the session here, it's these top 5 tracks that are the loops. Obviously they're in a different octave range, so you can play them next to each other. Same with this track here. And then we've got the final track being the loop we end on. And obviously this one as well, when we kind of bring more instruments in around the 40-second mark. Speaking of the 40-second mark, I actually played this loop a little bit earlier. So I just automated the track volume just at the start there, and I also automated the low pass filter as well. And I've done that with some of the other tracks, like this end one here. You can see the low pass filter going down, and I've also automated some of the volume as well. What was important when we hit that point where these new instruments were being introduced, I wanted a little bit more of a hit at those points. So what I did was I took our initial loop that I used for the introduction, I right clicked, froze the track, and then it came up with an option to flatten the track, and that basically turned it into an audio file. And then I just found a specific beat in that track and kind of took that, and you can see here in the track named Freeze, I've got a few here at certain changing points within the piece. Another thing to note, at around the 30-second mark, I added a little bit of delay on our initial percussion loop as well. You can see there, just got a little ping pong delay, and I'm pretty sure I automated it as well. Yeah, you can see I automated the feedback and sort of the dry and wetness. So you don't hear any delay when we start off the piece, but obviously when we get to that sort of break, I kind of turned it all the way up. It's quite cool using these percussion loops as the foundation of the piece. And when I sent it over to Ollie to listen to, he got sort of detective investigator vibes from it, which was interesting because initially when I created this demo, I was listening to lots of like Aphex Twin and the Death Stranding soundtrack, and it doesn't sound anything too like it now, but I'm kind of quite happy what it morphed into. So taking a look at some of the other loops I've used in the piece, there's a patch called Driver, and it's also using the percussion sounds. There's a really cool thing within the Brunel loops in Albion NEO, and that's the fact that you can switch the direction in which the loop's being played. So that's what I've done with this patch here. So everything's being played in reverse, and you get this kind of nice pulsing sound, which really aids the final percussion loop of our foundation. So I'm going to go ahead and play that out for you. I'm going to solo it and also add in our final percussion loop. You can hear how they work well with each other. So these next two loops I've sort of used as a baseline. The first one being a patch called Caught in the Reeds, and that uses the low synth sound, and the other one being called First Light, which also uses the low synth sound. And this one, like the driver loop, is also reversed. The Caught in the Reeds patch starts pretty much at the beginning, with the First Light patch being introduced around that 40-second mark, where more instruments are being introduced. So the Caught in the Reeds patch sounds like this. And the First Light patch sounds like this. We've also got a final loop here called Sun on the Horizon, and that's actually using the menu articulation. So the way the loops work is you've got articulations for the individual instrument that's used in the recording of that loop, and then you have a menu just showing how all of those sounds work together, and then you've got a tempo synced menu as well. So I've decided to use the tempo synced version of the menu, creating these really nice effects as our intro starts building up, and it sounds like this. You can also hear that has been reversed as well. Moving on, we've got 3 brass tracks. Majority of the time they're being played in the high register, 2 of those tracks being staccatissimos, and then a legato brass track being introduced at the end of the piece with our final percussion loop. So our brass staccatissimo tracks pretty much play the same thing, one of them being an octave higher, but yeah, more often than not, the same thing is being played. What I've done with these two as well is I've also put a delay on them, a ping pong delay. If I just click, you can see that there. So if we open up the piano roll, we can see that we're predominantly playing in thirds, starting with the F minor third, kind of reinforcing the key of the piece. A little bit later on, you can see there's an A flat major third, and then every now and again, before the sequence sort of repeats, you've got a little walking melody, and then a nice descending one just to finish the piece off. And I'll go ahead and show you how these both sound together with the added effect of the delay. Looking at the brass legato track, it joins at the end of the piece and it plays this high melody line which it borrows from a Stevenson Steam Band patch that starts way earlier in the piece, which we'll get to a little bit later. So opening the piano roll for this one, you can see there's some dynamic automation here, which I recorded in as I played it. So the way to do that is clicking this little guy at the top here. And then that means when you hit record, you play something in, you can, move whatever sliders or parameters you want, and that'll record in as well as the MIDI. And then after I recorded it, I hit B for the draw mode just to clean up anything. And by holding down Command as well, it prevents it from being gridlocked. You can create a smoother curve if that's what you're going for. One thing to note is that the brass in Albion NEO is a real treat. While the recordings were used also in the Stevenson Steam Band patches and the Segler textures, the just standard recordings alone are really something to delve into. While I've only used the staccatissimo and legato patches, if I bring up the UI here, you can see there's a really wide variety of some very unique brass patches. Particular favourites of mine being the hollow patch and the pulsing patch. But I'm going to go ahead and show you how my line sounds with the legato patch I recorded it in. You can hear for yourself that the brass has a really nice tone to it. Moving on to our string section, I begin this with a tremolo patch, and it very subtly provides a sort of drone to the introduction of the piece, and then again helps build up momentum in the 40-second section where more instruments are being introduced. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the introduction again and solo it out so you can keep an ear out for it. So here we go. So you can hear how that faded in. It's really subtle, but it's effective. And we're just droning on an F to help reinforce the key of F minor. Now we've moved up to a G. So you can hear in the break at around 40 seconds how the tremolo strings help bring us into this new section, playing on the G and then also increasing the dynamics. As I'm sure you've heard as well, after the staccatissimo brass sequence begins to repeat, we get these sort of swells of nice string legatos. So it's these two tracks here that introduce a bit of colour and harmonic flavour to the introduction of the piece, so everything's not too static and stuck on an F minor. You can see there's some fourth intervals there and some sixth intervals before we're led into our melody after the break at 40 seconds. And this is the same melody that our brass legato line right at the end helps bolster up. And like I said before, that's originally taken from a Stevenson's Steam Band patch that I used way earlier on, but pushed it in the background. So the strings really bring it to light here. You may have noticed I've also got another strings legato track, but unlike these two, it's actually playing in the lower register of the string section, acting as a bass just like our low synth loops were. I'm going to go ahead and play these three tracks together around the 1 minute mark, as there's quite a nice harmonic change there, and I really like the melody in the higher strings. And you can hear we're ending on an F minor as well, with the higher strings playing an F and then our low string playing a C. You can also hear I've got quite a bit of reverb on these strings as well. So if we take a look at the session view, I've just got one send and it's the Lexicon 224 reverb. And taking a look at our higher string tracks, you can see I've got the reverb turned up fairly high on those as well. Moving on from our string section, we've got one Segler texture called A Hair and Some Air, and that's a really nice kind of brass sound. And that's also coupled up with this Stevenson Steam Band patch called Bubbling Envy Pad. And both of these tracks play kind of similar things, acting as sort of pads for the piece. So I just laid a few chords down to make the harmony a little bit more interesting. So I'll go ahead and solo these two out for you so you can hear how they sound. You can see how that sounds a little bit more Aphex 20, I guess. Certainly more ambient. If I go ahead and solo out the Hair and Some Air patch, you can hear our brass recordings. Also slightly automated the low pass filter. And I've got the mixer oscillating as well by turning it on here. Right, if I switch to the Bubbling Envy pad, you can see how I've also messed about with the low and high pass filters, and the mixer oscillates slightly as well. Creates this really nice sort of muffled sound, which is really good for a pad, as the name suggests. And the final patch I'm using is another Stevenson Steam Band patch called Bleep Bloop. And its default state, it's an arpeggiator, but I didn't actually play any chords with it. These are the tracks that have that melody line that the string legato tracks and the brass legato track was borrowing. In this patch I've put two very different sounds in, so when I oscillate or automate the mixer, you get very big contrast in the sound. So I'll just go ahead and show you what I mean. So initially it sounds quite high pitched like this. And then by moving the mixer, get a very different sound. I also automated the low pass filter on this one as well. And the reason I've got two tracks here is because one of them I used the high pitch sound and the other one I used the lower, more sort of plonky sound. And that's pretty much it for my piece. I really appreciate you for watching, and I hope you found it interesting, me using Ableton for a change. Certainly was a learning curve, but I feel fairly confident in it now, although I'm not against any sort of tips or tricks. So please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Like I said, we're hoping to experiment using our libraries in a variety of DAWs for upcoming videos. So if that's something that interests you, please make sure to subscribe. And definitely make sure to check out Albion NEO, because it's a real treasure trove of sounds and you can do some really cool things with it. Anyway, thanks ever so much for watching. Bye-bye.